December 1944. Snow fell like slow ashes over Belgium's Ardennes forest. Private Daniel Harrow, age 43, adjusted his helmet and wiped frost from his glasses. He'd once stood before marble halls and whispered to students about Botticelli's brushstrokes. Now he trudged through mud beside boys half his age, their rifles glinting like frozen steel. Daniel was an art professor before the war, quiet, meticulous, a man who believed that paintings could hold the soul of a civilization. When his university burned in the Blitz, something inside him cracked. He enlisted not out of glory, but to save what he could of beauty in a world that seemed intent on erasing it. But fate, as always, had a peculiar sense of irony. One icy morning, while the 101st huddled in Bastion's ruins, a jeep arrived, olive drab, marked with the faded insignia of the U.S. War Department. Two officers stepped out, one carrying a folder stamped classified. They asked for Harrow by name. Private Harrow, the taller one said, his tone sharp. You're being reassigned. Temporary duty under Special Art Recovery Division. Daniel blinked. You mean the Monuments Men? The officer gave a tight smile. Something like that. But this one's off the record. As the jeep rolled away, Daniel's breath clouded in the air. The forest around him was quiet, too quiet. Somewhere beyond those trees, the Germans were retreating and taking Europe's masterpieces with them. And Daniel Harrow was about to follow. The jeep rattled down the snow-bitten road, its tires grinding over ice and gravel. Daniel sat in the back, squeezed between two crates covered with tarpaulins. Beneath them, he caught a glimpse of wooden frames and canvas. Paintings, confiscated or rescued, he couldn't tell. The officer riding shotgun turned back slightly. Name's Captain Willard. You're with us now, Harrow. You've got a reputation, Oxford-educated, fluent in French, and you once wrote a book on Flemish masters. Daniel nodded, uncertain. That was another life. Willard chuckled without warmth. That life's exactly why you're here. We're hunting a man named Colonel Eric Falk, SS, art enthusiast, collector, and thief. He's fleeing east with a convoy of stolen works. Rembrandt, Rubens, maybe even the Ghent altarpiece. Our job is to find him before he disappears into Germany. The words hit Daniel like a strike of cold wind. The Ghent altarpiece, one of civilization's greatest treasures. To lose it would be like losing a piece of humanity itself. They reached a half-ruined chateau on the outskirts of Spa, Belgium. Inside, candles flickered over maps pinned to the walls. A few men in plain uniforms studied photographs of trucks, rail lines, and crates stenciled with eagles and swastikas. Willard motioned to the table. You'll identify what's authentic. We move out at dawn. Daniel stared at the faces of the men around him. Soldiers, scholars, spies. They were fighting a different kind of war. Not for land, but for memory. Outside, the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying faint echoes of gunfire from the east. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. The chateau smelled of damp stone, diesel, and stale coffee. Daniel barely slept. At dawn, frost glazed the window panes, and somewhere outside, an engine sputtered to life. Inside the briefing room, maps stretched across the table like open wounds. Arrows, red circles, lines marked enemy movement. Captain Willard paced. Fox convoy left Liège 2 nights ago. We intercepted a radio transmission near Malmedy. He's heading for the Reich border, probably through a back road the Germans used for smuggling gold in 41. Our window is closing. A corporal unrolled a photograph, grainy, black and white. Trucks with tarps, guarded by SS officers. But Daniel's eyes caught something else. A blurred corner of a wooden crate, branded with an insignia he recognized, the seal of the Ghent Cathedral. His pulse quickened. That's it, he whispered. The altarpiece. Willard nodded grimly. Then we're going to take it back. The team was small, 4 men and a single jeep. Daniel wasn't a soldier, but they handed him a sidearm anyway. He felt its weight like a confession. As they rolled out, snow began again, soft and relentless. The road wound through burned-out villages, where church bells hung cracked and useless. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what art meant in times like this. Beauty had always survived, through plagues, through empires, but now it seemed the world was actively trying to destroy it. By noon, they reached the edge of the Ardennes. Smoke rose on the horizon. Somewhere out there, Beyond the white trees and frozen rivers, a stolen world awaited, and a man willing to kill to keep it. Daniel gripped the map tighter. The hunt had begun. The forest was a cathedral of silence. Snow weighed heavy on the pines, and every branch creaked like old timber under strain. Daniel trudged behind the jeep, boots crunching in rhythm with his thoughts. The war had turned men into ghosts, shadows that moved, fired, and fell without sound. Captain Willard raised a hand, signaling a halt. The road ahead narrowed into a valley. "Recon spotted movement here last night," he whispered. "Could be Fox convoy." Daniel crouched beside him, peering through binoculars. In the distance, black smoke rose from a cluster of trees, faint but steady. Willard motioned to his men. "We go on foot from here. Stay low. No noise." They moved like wraiths through the snow, rifles tight, breath shallow. Daniel's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He wasn't made for this. His hands had once held brushes, not weapons. Yet, as they crept closer, he saw it. Tire tracks frozen into the ice, fresh and deep. "Convoy came through here," Willard murmured. "Yesterday, maybe hours ago." They followed the tracks until they reached a small clearing. There, beside a half-frozen creek, stood a wrecked German truck. Its tires were shredded, its side riddled with bullet holes. Inside were crates, smashed, empty, abandoned. Daniel brushed snow from one and froze. There it was, the Reichseagle, stamped over a faint, painted cherub. One of the stolen art crates. But before he could speak, a single shot cracked through the trees. Then another. "Down!" Willard shouted. The air filled with echoes of rifle fire. Snow exploded around them. Somewhere beyond the creek, a German patrol had been waiting. Daniel dove behind a log, clutching his pistol, his breath ragged. The war for art had just become a war for survival. Bullets snapped through the pines, tearing bark and snow alike. Daniel pressed himself into the cold earth, his heart hammering so loud he feared the enemy could hear it. Captain Willard shouted orders, his voice sharp and calm. The kind of calm only men used to chaos could have. "Flank left. Keep low." Daniel's fingers trembled as he gripped the pistol. He hadn't fired it before. His world had been museums, not battlefields. Yet here, under a sky the color of lead, he found no difference between courage and instinct. A shadow darted between the trees. A German soldier, rifle raised. Daniel froze. Time seemed to stretch thin, brittle as ice. Then, a crack of his pistol split the stillness. The man fell face first into the snow. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. He stared at his shaking hands. He had taken a life. Somewhere in his mind, he tried to rationalize it. War, duty, survival. But all he felt was emptiness. The firefight ended as quickly as it began. The last echo faded into the forest's breath. 3 Germans lay dead. One was wounded, clutching his arm, blood steaming in the cold. Willard crouched beside him. "Where's Fox convoy?" he demanded. The soldier spat blood and muttered in German, "You're too late. The colonel is gone. East. Always east." Willard frowned and stood. "We're moving. Pack up." Daniel lingered, staring at the fallen man he'd shot. Snow had begun to cover him already, soft and indifferent, like the world itself. That night, as they made camp in the ruins of an old barn, Willard handed Daniel a flask. "You did fine today." Daniel took a sip, the burn chasing the cold away. "Fine," he repeated quietly. "That's one word for it." He looked out at the stars. Somewhere, beyond that horizon, beauty and brutality were running side by side, and he had just learned how easily one could destroy the other. The wind howled through the barn's broken rafters, carrying the smell of burnt hay and cordite. The men slept in turns, rifles within reach, boots still on. Daniel sat apart, near a flickering lantern, notebook in hand. Old habits die hard. Even now, he sketched the faint pattern he'd seen on the stolen crates earlier that day. A cherub, a painted cherub beneath the Reichseagle. He shaded the lines carefully, realizing something curious. The cherub wasn't random. It was from the Van der Weyden triptych, a piece believed destroyed in 1917. Foch hadn't stolen just any art. He was chasing relics lost to time. Willard approached quietly, his face drawn by exhaustion. "You're awake." "Couldn't sleep," Daniel murmured. "Tell me, Captain, why is the War Department chasing one man's private collection? Surely there are bigger things to fight for." Willard crouched beside him, watching the flame dance in the lantern. You think this war's just about land and power? Fox Convoy holds more than paintings. Intelligence says he's carrying coded ledgers. Art traded for gold, gold traded for weapons. Every brushstroke he's stolen has blood behind it. Daniel exhaled slowly. So art is currency. How poetic. The captain smirked grimly. Exactly. The Führer plans a museum, a shrine to stolen culture. Fox pieces are the foundation. A gust of wind slammed the barn door open. For a moment, moonlight spilled in, pale, ghostly. Daniel's sketch fluttered. He suddenly remembered a rumor he'd heard years ago. A monastery in the hills near Monshaw, used by the SS as a storage site. If Fox was heading east, that could be his next stop. He tore the page from his notebook and handed it to Willard. We have to move before sunrise. I think I know where he's going. Willard nodded once. Then we move. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon. Quiet, gray, uncertain, like the beginning of something that would change them all. By dawn, the Jeep roared back to life, its engine coughing against the cold. Frost clung to every bolt, every rifle barrel. Daniel sat beside Willard, map unfolded on his knees, tracing their route toward the German border. The others rode in silence, faces pale under steel helmets. The road wound through villages still smoldering from last week's bombardments. Houses stood gutted, their windows blown out like empty eyes. A few locals watched from the ruins, hollow faces, wrapped in rags, too tired to fear or hate. Daniel couldn't help staring. I lectured in towns like these once, he murmured. Students who painted sunflowers in rivers. Now they paint with ashes. Willard didn't respond. His eyes were on the road. Keep your sympathy in check, Harrow. The enemy's still out there, and so's Falk. By mid-morning, they reached a crossroads near Monshaw. A burned-out truck lay on its side, blackened crates scattered across the snow. Daniel jumped out to inspect. Most were empty, but one was half buried, its lids splintered open. Inside lay a fragment of canvas, a section of golden drapery, singed but unmistakably masterful. Rubens, Daniel whispered. The Adoration series. Willard knelt beside him. Looks like Foxmen dumped cargo to move faster. He's shedding weight. Daniel brushed frost off the crate and froze. Carved into the wood was a small symbol, an iron cross entwined with a serpent. Not Reich markings. What the devil is this? Willard asked. Daniel frowned. It's old, alchemical, perhaps. Symbol of possession. Willard's gaze hardened. Or of obsession. The sound of a distant engine cut through the stillness. They dove for cover as a German motorcycle roared down the road, a dispatch rider, unaware of their presence. Willard's hand shot up. Hold fire. We follow. They watched the rider disappear into the forest path leading east, the same road Daniel had marked on the map. Falk wasn't just transporting art. He was guarding something he believed belonged to him. And Daniel Harrow was about to find out what that was. The monastery stood half buried in snow, perched on a hill above the valley like a ghost from another age. Its bell tower leaned slightly, cracked by shellfire, and ivy crept across its frozen stones. No sound came from within, only the whisper of wind through the archways. Daniel and Willard crouched behind a stone wall overlooking the courtyard. Two German trucks sat idling near the gate, their exhaust curling like smoke from a dying candle. A handful of SS guards paced the grounds, rifles slung lazily, unaware that anyone was watching. This is it, Willard murmured. Intel says Falk used it as a temporary depot. We go quiet, we go fast. The team split into pairs. Daniel followed Willard along the side path, boots crunching softly. The iron door they found was unlocked, strange for a German post. Inside, the air was colder than outside, thick with the scent of wax and mildew. They entered a long corridor lined with marble saints whose faces had been shot away, their eyes gone, their prayers silenced. Daniel's lantern flickered, casting restless shadows that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. Down here, Willard whispered. They descended into the crypt and froze. Crates upon crates lined the stone walls, stacked high to the ceiling, each marked with the same eagle and serpent insignia Daniel had seen before. But this time, some were open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were paintings, hundreds of them, from cathedrals, estates, and galleries across Europe. Daniel reached for one, pulling it gently into the light. His breath caught. Titian, he whispered. The penitent Magdalene. God, he took it all. Willard's jaw tightened. We'll need a truck to move this. Before Daniel could respond, a faint echo drifted down the corridor. A voice, speaking German, deep and commanding. Willard drew his pistol. That's Falk. The sound grew closer. Boots on stone, measured and deliberate. Daniel's pulse thundered. After all the pursuit, all the snow and blood and silence, the thief of Europe was only a few steps away. The echo of boots drew nearer, calm, deliberate, as if the man walking below the monastery feared nothing in this world. Daniel's breath misted in the cold air. Willard motioned for silence, pressing against the wall near a cracked archway. Through it, the crypt opened into a vast chamber lit by flickering lamps. There, amid the stolen beauty of Europe, stood Colonel Erich Falk. He was taller than Daniel expected, thin but composed, his SS uniform perfectly tailored despite the grime of retreat. A silver monocle glinted in the lamplight. Around him, soldiers packed crates and checked manifests, their movements efficient, ritualistic. Falk raised a hand. Careful with that one, he said in German. It's Vermeer. A civilization can survive without generals, but not without artists. Daniel's pulse quickened. Those words, the reverence, the arrogance, they revealed everything. Falk didn't see himself as a thief. He saw himself as a curator of conquest. Willard leaned close. We could take him now. Wait, Daniel whispered. His gaze locked on a single crate set apart from the rest, smaller, bound in iron, sealed with wax. It bore no markings, only the serpent emblem. What's inside that one? He muttered. Falk turned toward the crate, almost as if he'd heard the question. He rested his hand upon it gently, almost lovingly. This, he said to one of his men, is not for the Führer's museum. It is personal. The soldier nodded, confused but obedient. Willard's hand twitched toward his sidearm. But before he could move, a beam of Daniel's lantern, faint, accidental, reflected off the wall. Falk looked up sharply, his monocle flashing. Who's there? He barked. Chaos erupted. Shouts, footsteps, gunfire. Willard shoved Daniel behind a column as bullets sparked off stone. The team returned fire, their shots echoing like thunder in the sacred chamber. When the smoke cleared, Falk and his guards were gone, vanished through a side passage. Only the iron crate remained. Daniel approached it, hands trembling. He ran his fingers over the wax seal. He left it behind, he whispered. Willard stepped forward. Then let's see what he valued more than his life. He pried the latch. The lid creaked open, and what lay inside made Daniel's heart stop cold. The lid lifted slowly, hinges groaning like old ghosts. Daniel leaned in, expecting another painting, perhaps a relic, a sculpture, something of gold or marble. But what he saw instead made him stumble back, speechless. Inside, cushioned with linen and straw, was a child's portrait. Small, delicate, painted in oils, a boy no older than 10, dressed in 18th century attire. The brushwork was exquisite, tender, filled with light. The boy's blue eyes seemed alive, too alive, watching Daniel with quiet innocence. What in God's name? Willard murmured. Daniel swallowed hard. It's not part of any catalog. I've never seen it before. He turned the frame carefully. On the back, a name was scrawled in neat, fading German. Emil Falk, 1934. Willard's jaw tightened. His son. Daniel felt the cold settle deep in his chest. A personal treasure, hidden among stolen masterpieces. Falk wasn't just hoarding art for the Reich. He was saving memories. Willard sighed. So even monsters have ghosts. Before Daniel could reply, a low rumble echoed from above. Engines, several of them. He rushed to the narrow window slit. Through the snow and fog, he saw headlights weaving down the monastery road. Trucks, dozens of them. Willard cursed. He's coming back. Reinforcements. The team scrambled. Daniel grabbed the portrait, tucking it beneath his coat. We can't leave it. Forget the painting, Willard snapped. We need to move. But Daniel shook his head. This isn't just about art anymore. It's about what drives men like him, what they think is worth saving when everything else burns. Outside, the roar of engines grew louder. The monastery trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling like dry snow. Willard turned to Daniel, grim-faced. Then we better make sure we survive to tell someone what we found. The two men sprinted up the crypt stairs as spotlights cut across the night. Behind them, in the cold darkness, the boys' painted eyes seemed to follow, haunting, gentle, and impossibly alive. The roar of engines split the monastery's silence. Trucks screeched to a halt in the courtyard, headlights cutting through the fog. German voices barked orders, sharp, panicked. Willard shoved open a side door, gesturing frantically. This way, Daniel followed, clutching the portrait beneath his coat. The cold bit deep, but adrenaline burned hotter. Snow whipped against his face as they sprinted downhill through the trees. Behind them, the monastery lit up. Tracer rounds streaked the dark, bullets sparking off stone. "Keep moving," Willard yelled. "They've got dogs." Daniel's lungs burned. His boots slipped on the icy slope, and for a moment, he almost fell, but Willard caught him by the arm. "You drop that painting, I'll shoot you myself," he growled, half smiling. Through the forest, the night flickered with gunfire. The Germans weren't far, their voices echoing, shouts carried by the wind. Daniel could hear the dogs now, barking, furious and hungry. They reached a stream, half frozen, black water cutting through the snow like a scar. Willard pointed across. "That'll throw off their scent. Move." The water was numbing, biting through wool and leather. Daniel's teeth chattered as they climbed the opposite bank. He turned back once and saw flames rising from the monastery, bright orange licking the sky. "Fox burning it," Daniel gasped. "He's destroying the evidence." Willard didn't look back. "He's covering his trail. We'll find him again." When they finally stopped, miles later, dawn had begun to gray the horizon. They hid in the remains of an old shepherd's hut, half collapsed, but dry enough to breathe. Daniel pulled the portrait from under his coat. The frame was cracked, the glass shattered, but the boy's face remained untouched, serene amid ruin. Willard stared at it quietly. He risked everything for that. A man doesn't do that for orders. Daniel nodded slowly. No, he does it for love, the one thing even war can't destroy. Outside, a distant explosion echoed. The Ardennes were waking, and with them, a storm far greater than either man imagined. Morning came gray and hollow. Smoke still rose in the distance where the monastery had burned. The snow around the hut was peppered with ash, as if the sky itself had tried to bury the evidence. Daniel rubbed his hands before the tiny fire they'd built, the portrait leaning against a broken beam. Willard crouched nearby, radio in hand, adjusting the crackling dial. "Headquarters, this is Raven Team. Come in." Static, then a faint voice, almost lost in the noise. "Raven Team, proceed east. Fought convoy sighted near Simarath. You are not alone. Repeat, you are not alone." Willard frowned. What the hell does that mean? Before Daniel could ask, they heard movement outside, boots crunching on snow. Both men drew their weapons. A moment later, a figure stepped into view, an American officer in a dirty greatcoat, hands raised. "Easy, fellas," he said, grinning. "Captain Briggs, OSS liaison. We've been tracking the same target." Willard lowered his gun slowly. "OSS, since when did they care about paintings?" "Or into a new one," Briggs muttered. "We think he's heading for a safe corridor near Aachen. We've got men cutting him off, but we'll need your expertise to identify his cargo. You in?" Daniel glanced at Willard, then at the portrait. "If Fox smuggling the soul of Europe in those crates, someone has to stop him." Briggs smiled grimly. "Then saddle up, Professor. We move in 30. Outside, the snow had begun again, soft, relentless, erasing every footprint behind them. The hunt for Fox was no longer just about art. It was about truth, and whoever reached it first. By noon, 3 jeeps rolled out of the hills. Willard, Daniel, and the OSS team under Captain Briggs. The wind cut sharp as glass, the forest on either side eerily quiet. The war had moved east, but the land still felt haunted. Every tree, every frozen ditch, a silent witness to passing ghosts. Daniel sat in the back seat, the portrait secured beside him under a blanket. He stared at the boy's calm expression, wondering what kind of man he would have become had his father chosen peace instead of madness. Briggs smoked a cigarette as he drove. "You know, Harrow," he said, glancing in the mirror. "For a guy who used to lecture about brushstrokes, you handle a gun pretty steady." Daniel managed a faint smile. "I suppose art critics and soldiers both have to learn how to see clearly." The road twisted downward through dense pines, and the radio crackled. Convoy spotted near Widow. 2 trucks, armored escort. Heavy load. Willard looked back. That's him. Minutes later, they saw it. A column of vehicles creeping along the valley road, swastikas painted over with mud. The lead truck bore the serpent insignia. Briggs lowered his binoculars. That's Falk, all right. We'll cut across that ridge, hit them from above. They dismounted, climbing through the snow to a rocky overlook. The convoy was slow, vulnerable, boxed in by terrain. Willard raised his hand to signal the ambush, then froze. Something was wrong. Daniel followed his gaze, smoke ahead on the road, but not from the convoy. Another group of trucks was approaching from the opposite direction. Soviets, their red stars barely visible through the snow. Briggs cursed under his breath. Hell, they're after the same prize. Willard's jaw tightened. If they get to Falk first, those paintings vanish into another kind of empire. The ground trembled as artillery rumbled in the distance. The front was shifting fast. Daniel felt history turning beneath his boots. For the first time, he realized they weren't just chasing a thief. They were racing time itself. The valley exploded before Daniel's eyes. The first shell struck near the lead German truck, shattering it into a storm of fire and wood. Men screamed, scattering into the trees. The Soviets had opened fire without warning, a rolling thunder of mortars echoing off the hillsides. Willard's voice cut through the chaos. Get down. Return fire. Briggs' men spread out, rifles cracking. Daniel pressed himself behind a boulder, snow and dirt raining down from the blast. Through the haze, he saw Falk's convoy trapped between 2 infernos. German soldiers firing uphill while Soviet armor rumbled closer, grinding through the drifts like iron beasts. Professor, Willard shouted over the noise. The serpent-marked truck, it's breaking off. Daniel looked. Falk's personal vehicle had swerved away, skidding onto a forest path. Its tires churned through the slush, desperate for escape. We can't let him go. Willard fired a burst toward the fleeing truck, but it was too far. Briggs grabbed Daniel's shoulder. You want Falk? That's your window. The rest of us hold this line. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't a soldier. He was a man with a notebook, a painting, and a promise. But he couldn't let the past disappear into the woods again. He nodded once, then sprinted downhill, snow flying under his boots. The sound of battle dimmed behind him, replaced by the thrum of an engine ahead. Through the pines, he glimpsed the back of the serpent-marked truck. It hit a frozen rut, fishtailed, and slammed into a tree. Steam hissed from its hood. Daniel raised his pistol, panting. Falk, he shouted. The door swung open. Colonel Eric Falk stepped out, calm even in ruin, pistol already drawn. His uniform was torn, blood on his glove, but his eyes were cold fire. You don't understand what you're protecting, Professor, Falk called out. You think you're saving art, but you're saving nothing. Daniel steadied his hand. Then tell me what it is you're really after. Falk smiled faintly. Not after. Preserving. He lifted his weapon, and the forest erupted with another explosion, throwing both men to the ground. Snow, flame, and silence swallowed everything. When Daniel opened his eyes, the world was snow and smoke. The forest around him was unrecognizable, trees splintered, ground torn open by shell fire. His ears rang with a steady hum, the kind that follows an explosion. He tried to move. Pain flared down his arm, but he managed to sit up. The serpent-marked truck lay on its side nearby, one wheel still spinning weakly. Steam hissed from the engine, curling into the cold air. Falk, he croaked. No answer, only the soft crackle of fire. Daniel crawled toward the truck. Inside, crates were shattered, their contents scattered, silver frames, broken statues, parchment rolled tight and singed at the edges. And beneath the wreckage, something gleamed, a metal cylinder, half buried in the mud. He pulled it free. It was small, sealed tight, and engraved with that same serpent insignia. Not art, something else entirely. Classified, he whispered, realizing. Documents. Footsteps crunched behind him. Daniel spun, gun raised, but it wasn't Falk. It was Willard, limping through the haze, his coat torn and blood staining the sleeve. You're alive, Daniel said with a shaky breath. Barely, Willard muttered. Briggs' team scattered. Soviets pushed through. We need to move. Daniel showed him the cylinder. He was protecting this. Willard frowned. Then it's what he didn't want us to see. He tried the lid, but it wouldn't budge. We'll get it open later. Right now, we... A rustle interrupted him. From behind the truck, a figure rose. Falk, bloodied but standing, pistol in hand. His voice was low, steady. Put it down, Harrow. Daniel's grip tightened on the cylinder. What's in here? Falk's eyes narrowed. The reason your precious civilization exists at all. The proof that beauty cannot survive without power. He took a step forward. Willard raised his rifle. Don't. For a long second, no one moved. Then Falk smiled faintly, not cruelly, but with strange sadness. Then you truly don't understand what you've taken, he said. And by the time you do, it will be too late. He turned and vanished into the smoke before either of them could fire. Daniel looked down at the cylinder in his hands. It felt impossibly heavy, heavier than any masterpiece. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the war for it had only just begun. Night had fallen by the time Daniel and Willard reached the ruins of a farmhouse on the edge of the forest. The snow outside glowed faintly under the moonlight, but inside, the only light came from a flickering lantern. Daniel sat by the hearth, the metal cylinder resting on the table between them like a coiled serpent. He turned it over slowly, studying the engraving. A serpent swallowing its tail. The Ouroboros, he murmured. An ancient symbol of eternity. Renewal through destruction. Willard frowned. You mean Falk thinks he's some kind of philosopher now? Daniel didn't answer. He slid a knife into the cylinder's seam, twisting carefully. With a metallic click, the lid came loose. Inside was a roll of parchment, sealed in wax and bound with a faded ribbon. He unrolled it, and both men leaned closer. It wasn't a map. It was a ledger, handwritten names, locations, coded notes. But the names weren't just dealers or collectors. They were officials, financiers, ministers. Some were German, others French, Belgian, even British. Willard's face darkened. My God, it's a list of collaborators. Daniel nodded. And this column, see here? Paintings matched with payments, coded in gold weight. Falk wasn't just stealing art. He was buying silence. Willard rubbed a hand over his face. If this gets out, it blows the roof off half of Europe. Daniel looked back at the parchment. That's why he wanted it back. He wasn't protecting Hitler's collection. He was protecting the people who funded it. For a moment, they sat in silence, the fire popping softly between them. Then Willard said quietly, This isn't just a monument's job anymore. We take this to command. We're stepping into politics, and politics get men killed. Daniel rolled the parchment and slipped it into his coat. Then maybe that's a risk worth taking. A sudden noise outside, the crunch of boots in snow. Both men froze. Willard extinguished the lantern. The silence returned, heavy and alive. Then a voice called softly from the darkness. American soldiers, you're surrounded. Come out slowly. It wasn't German. The accent was thick, deliberate, Russian. Daniel's pulse quickened. They'd found them, and they weren't here for the art. Snow drifted through the broken doorway as the Soviets entered the farmhouse, rifles ready, faces hard beneath fur hats. Their leader was a major in a long gray coat, a red star gleaming on his cap. His English was rough but clear. You are American? Willard rose slowly, hands half raised. That's right, Major. Friendly forces. The Russian's eyes moved over the room, landing on Daniel and the parchment tucked beneath his coat. You are far from Bastogne. What is your purpose here? Reconnaissance, Willard lied. Cut off from division. The major studied him for a long moment, then gestured for one of his men to search the table. The empty cylinder clattered against the wood. He picked it up, running a finger over the serpent engraving. Strange container for reconnaissance. Daniel forced a calm voice. We found it near a destroyed convoy. Belonged to a German officer. Nothing of value. The major smiled faintly. Everything Germans carry is of value. Outside, engines idled. More troops waited. Daniel could feel the tension thickening, a fragile thread ready to snap. If they discovered the ledger, it wouldn't go to Allied command. It would vanish behind the Iron Curtain before the war even ended. Willard met Daniel's eyes briefly. A silent message passed between them. Then Willard said loudly, You're welcome to inspect the wreck, Major. Half a mile north. Trucks, weapons, maybe maps. The Russian narrowed his eyes. You will take me there. Of course, Willard replied. As the Soviets turned toward the door, Willard leaned close to Daniel and whispered, When I say run, you run. They stepped outside into the moonlight. Snow sparkled under the headlights of Soviet trucks. For a heartbeat, the night seemed still, beautiful, even. Then Willard shouted, "Now!" He slammed his shoulder into the major, knocking him aside. Gunfire erupted, flaring across the snow. Daniel bolted toward the trees, the ledger tight against his chest, bullets whistling past. Behind him, Willard's voice rang out once more, "Go, Harrow! Don't look back!" Before being drowned in the thunder of rifles, Daniel plunged into the dark forest alone, chased by echoes and the ghosts of every secret he now carried. By dawn, the gunfire had faded. Daniel stumbled through the forest until he reached the edge of a frozen meadow. His breath came in ragged bursts, and each step felt heavier than the last. He collapsed behind a fallen log, the world spinning in shades of gray and white. The ledger pressed against his ribs like a second heartbeat. For a long moment, he simply stared at the horizon, waiting for a sound that would tell him Willard had made it out. But the forest gave nothing back. When the light grew stronger, Daniel forced himself to retrace his steps. The air was bitter with smoke. He found the farmhouse half collapsed, the door hanging open. Inside, bodies lay scattered, Soviet and American alike. The silence was complete. He found Willard near the hearth. One hand rested over his chest as though trying to shield it. Daniel knelt beside him, unable to speak. For a time, he just sat there. The man who had dragged him out of Bastogne, who had turned every frozen night into something survivable, was gone. Daniel pulled the dog tags gently from Willard's neck and folded them into his pocket. Then he noticed something beneath the man's hand, a folded scrap of paper, blood-stained but legible. It was a note, hastily written. "If I don't make it, trust no one. OSS has Falk in their sights. He's not working alone. Neither are we." Daniel frowned. Not working alone. Outside, he heard an engine. A jeep, slow, deliberate, approaching along the forest track. He grabbed his weapon, crouching by the window. The vehicle came into view, olive green, American markings, but no flags. Two men in gray coats stepped out, one holding a folder, the other carrying a camera. They looked too clean, too calm. The older one called out, "Private Harrow? We're with intelligence. We've been sent to recover you." Daniel didn't move. His hand rested on the ledger under his coat. He remembered Willard's last words, "Trust no one." The men exchanged a glance. Then one of them said quietly, "We need what you took from Falk." Daniel's stomach turned cold. They knew. And suddenly, he realized the real enemy might not have been wearing a uniform at all. Daniel didn't wait to see what the two agents would do next. He slipped out the back of the farmhouse and into the tree line, boots crunching on the frozen earth. The ledger felt like lead against his ribs, its paper rustling faintly as he ran. Behind him, voices shouted, "Harrow, stop!" Then the crack of a pistol split the cold morning. Bark flew from a nearby tree. He ducked, weaving through the woods until the sound of engines faded. When he finally reached the road, a shattered sign pointed east, St. Vith, for kilometers. He started walking, keeping to the ditches. The sky was pale and bruised, the snow thickening again. Every ruined barn and half-frozen stream whispered of men who'd passed here and never returned. By the time he reached the outskirts of the town, the air stank of burnt fuel and iron. Buildings stood gutted, the windows black holes. Yet from one corner came the faint sound of a generator, an American field station, temporary but alive. He hesitated. Going there meant safety or capture, but he needed warmth, food, a moment to think. He stepped inside the half-collapsed schoolhouse where the unit was quartered. A young medic looked up from his table. "You lost, soldier?" Daniel gave a weary smile. "Been that way since Normandy." The medic grinned faintly and poured him coffee. As Daniel drank, he studied the men, worn faces, honest exhaustion. They didn't know him, didn't care. For now, that was good. Then a jeep arrived outside. Two figures stepped out, gray coats again. The same men. Daniel's heart froze. He slipped out the back door, through a narrow alley. One of the agents spotted him, shouting, "He's got the ledger." Bullets whipped past as Daniel sprinted across the square, past burning trucks and shattered walls. A German church bell, somehow still standing, tolled faintly above the chaos, its sound hollow and haunting. He dove through a broken window and into a wine cellar beneath the old rectory. The smell of damp wood and dust filled his lungs. Footsteps above. Muffled orders. Then silence. Daniel waited, clutching the ledger. The church bell stopped. He knew now that the OSS wasn't just tracking Falk. They were cleaning up after him. And he was next. Daniel stayed hidden in the cellar until dusk. The wind above howled through the broken church windows, carrying the distant rumble of tanks. When he finally dared to move, he found an old service tunnel leading beneath the street. Damp, narrow, littered with wine crates and cobwebs. He crawled through, emerging into the basement of a ruined cafe. The smell of coffee and smoke still lingered. He was about to climb the stairs when a voice whispered sharply, "Don't move." A woman stood in the shadows, rifle raised. Her coat was patched, her hair tied back under a wool cap. The armband on her sleeve bore the faded letters of the Belgian resistance. "Who are you?" she demanded in French-accented English. Daniel lifted his hands. "American, 101st Airborne." She hesitated, studying his uniform. "The 101st pulled out days ago." "I didn't," he said. Her eyes softened slightly. "Then you're either brave or stupid. Maybe both." She lowered the rifle and nodded toward the back. "Come." Quickly, he followed her into a narrow stairwell leading up to a small apartment, its windows covered in blankets. A single candle burned on the table beside a radio and a stack of coded papers. "My name is Elise," she said. "I worked with your intelligence boys before the bulge. You're not the first one they've tried to silence." Daniel frowned. "You know about the OSS?" She smiled grimly. "Know them? I fed them half their information. But lately, they've stopped listening, started hunting their own." He unbuttoned his coat, revealing the ledger. "This is what they want." Elise's eyes widened. "Is that Fox List? You've heard of it?" She nodded. "Whispers only. A record of every man who financed the looting of Europe. Some of those names are American hero. Important ones." Daniel sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over him. "Then it's not just art anymore." "No," Elise said softly. "It's truth. And truth is the only thing more dangerous than war." Outside, engines roared faintly, the OSS patrols still searching. Elise moved to the window, peeking through a slit in the blanket. "They'll be back soon. But I know a way out, through the canal tunnels. I've used them before." Daniel nodded. "Then we move at dawn." Elise gave him a long, searching look. "You'd risk everything for a book of names?" He looked down at the ledger, its edges worn, its ink still damp from melted snow. "For a world that remembers what we fought for," he said quietly. And for the first time in days, he felt something close to purpose again. Just before dawn, Daniel and Elise slipped out of the cafe. The snow had turned to sleet, masking their footprints as they crossed what was left of St. Vith. Smoke curled from shattered roofs, and the air smelled of burnt oil and wet stone. The only sound was the distant hum of Allied engines patrolling the far road. Elise led him down an alley behind the post office, to a rusted grate half buried in snow. She pried it open, revealing a tunnel of brick and darkness. "Canal runs under the town," she whispered. "Used to move supplies. Now it moves ghosts." Daniel followed her inside, crouching low as the grate clanged shut above them. The tunnel smelled of mildew and time. Their lantern cast long, trembling shadows on the walls. Water trickled along the floor in slow, silver ribbons. "How far does this go?" he asked. 2 miles, maybe 3. It empties into the Meuse." They walked in silence for a while, boots echoing faintly. Daniel's thoughts churned. Willard, Falk, the ledger, the faces of the men who had died for something still half hidden in ink. "You're quiet," Elise said softly. "Thinking about what's worth dying for," he murmured. She gave a faint, sad smile. "That's something soldiers and spies never agree on." A noise interrupted them, faint at first, then clearer. Footsteps. Behind them. Elise's face went pale. She doused the lantern, plunging them into blackness. "They found us," she whispered. Daniel listened. The echoes were unmistakable, boots splashing in the shallow water, voices in English. OSS men. They ran. The tunnel twisted and narrowed, the walls closing in. Their breaths came in short bursts. Ahead, a faint circle of light shimmered, an exit. But between them and freedom, the tunnel split into 2 paths. "This way." Elise pointed left, but Daniel hesitated. From the right tunnel came another sound, the faintest hum of machinery, the flicker of light reflecting off metal. He recognized it instantly, a generator. Someone was down there. "Wait," he said. "Someone's using this place." Elise grabbed his sleeve. Forget it. We don't have time. But Daniel's curiosity, or maybe instinct, wouldn't let go. He moved toward the sound, leaving Elise torn between fear and trust. When he reached the end of the tunnel, he froze. A hidden chamber opened before him, lined with crates bearing the serpent insignia, Fox mark, dozens of them. And in the corner, a man hunched over a lamp, writing by hand. Daniel stepped closer. The man looked up. It was Fox. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The faint hum of the generator filled the chamber, mingling with the slow drip of water from the ceiling. Fox sat at a wooden table, his once pristine uniform torn and burned. His left arm was bandaged, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, gray and cold as the steel boxes stacked around him. I wondered when you'd find me, Professor, he said quietly. You have the persistence of a curator. Daniel raised his pistol. Drop the pen, Fox. Fox chuckled, setting it down. And ruin a lifetime's work? You've already taken my masterpiece once. He gestured to the crates. Do you know what's inside them? Daniel's hand tightened. Stolen art. That's what you are, a thief dressed as a patriot. No, Fox said calmly. A preserver. When Berlin burns, and it will, these will survive. The world rebuilds itself on memory. I saved what your generals would have let die. You murdered to do it, Daniel snapped. Fox rose slowly, wincing. You think your side is different? Look at the ledger you carry. Your allies funded the same greed they condemned. They'll burn my Reich today and build their own tomorrow. Daniel hesitated, the weight of the ledger pressing against his chest. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel. Elise. She appeared in the archway, breathless, rifle in hand. When she saw Fox, her expression froze. You, she whispered. Fox smiled faintly. Elise Moreau. I wondered if you'd survived Liège. Daniel turned sharply. You know him? Elise's jaw tightened. He raided our convent. Took everything. Paintings, relics, and people. My sister among them. Fox's smile faded. Your sister was a courier. She was carrying British codes. I had orders. You had a choice. Elise shouted, voice cracking. You always had a choice. The air trembled between them. Grief, fury, history all bleeding into one silence. Daniel stepped forward, gun still raised. This ends now. But Fox didn't flinch. End. No, Harrow. This is a beginning. Open the ledger. See whose signatures fill those pages. Then tell me who the real criminals are. Daniel hesitated. Fox's eyes gleamed. Even your OSS friends hunt you for it. Do you think they fear what I did, or what you'll learn? The echo of boots sounded again, louder now, from deeper in the tunnel. OSS men, closing fast. Fox looked past Daniel, a bitter smile touching his lips. You see, even your own shadows come to silence the truth. Elise's finger tightened on the trigger. Then we leave, now. Daniel backed toward the exit, pistol still fixed on Fox. You're staying here. Fox's voice followed them as they fled into the dark. Then remember, Professor, history belongs to whoever writes it down first. Elise grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him back through the tunnel as gunfire echoed behind them. The OSS patrol had arrived, shouting orders that bounced down the stone corridors like thunder. The air grew thick with dust and smoke. They ran, slipping on the wet brick, their lanterns swinging wildly. Behind them, Fox's voice vanished in the roar of boots and ricochets. Keep going, Elise shouted. A grenade detonated somewhere behind, the blast ripping through the tunnel. The ground buckled, the ceiling shuddered, and the walls began to cave. Daniel pushed Elise forward just as a beam crashed between them. The tunnel split in two, a choking cloud swallowing everything. Elise, he called out, coughing. Elise. Her voice came faintly through the dust. Go? I'll find another way. No, but it was too late. The rubble sealed the passage behind him. Daniel stumbled onward, half blind, half deaf. The tunnel sloped upward, narrowing as he went, the sound of rushing water growing louder. He realized with horror it wasn't the canal anymore. It was the Meuse breaking through. The blast had cracked the river wall. Water poured in, freezing, relentless. He clutched the ledger tight under his coat and fought his way forward. The current dragged at his legs, pulling him toward the dark. The only light came from a jagged hole ahead, daylight, faint and gray. He reached it, forcing himself up through debris and snow. When he finally crawled out, he was on the riverbank, gasping, soaked to the bone. The city lay behind him, half drowned and burning. He looked back once. The tunnels had collapsed entirely. No sign of Elise. For a long moment, he just sat there, shivering, staring at the ruined landscape. Then a figure emerged from the smoke. Captain Briggs. The OSS officer approached slowly, pistol drawn. His uniform was immaculate again, his expression unreadable. "Quite a mess you've made, Harrow," Briggs said. "You've been busy." Daniel staggered to his feet. "Willard warned me about you." Briggs smiled coldly. He was a patriot, but he didn't understand how peace is really made. He held out his hand. "Give me the ledger. It doesn't belong to you." Daniel looked down at the water-stained book in his coat, then at Briggs. "No," he said quietly. "It belongs to history." Briggs sighed. "That's unfortunate." He raised his pistol and fired. The gunshot echoed through the fog. Daniel stumbled backward, the icy air punched from his lungs. For a heartbeat, he felt nothing. Only the strange, hollow quiet that comes when the body refuses to accept death. Then the pain came, sharp and deep. He fell to his knees, clutching his side. The ledger slipped from his coat, tumbling into the slush. Briggs approached, boots crunching over ice. "I warned you, Professor," he said softly. "You were never built for this game." Daniel tried to reach for his pistol, but his strength was gone. Briggs crouched down, brushing snow from the ledger's cover. "We'll say you were lost in the confusion. A casualty of misplaced loyalty. The War Department prefers neat stories." He straightened, the book in his hand. "Goodbye, Harrow." A sharp crack broke the silence, not from Briggs' gun, but from the trees. He jerked, eyes wide, and collapsed into the snow, blood blooming beneath him. Daniel blinked in disbelief. A figure stepped from the smoke. Elise, face streaked with soot, her rifle trembling. "I told you I'd find another way," she said, her voice hoarse. Daniel fell back, relief and pain twisting together. She rushed to his side, tearing open his coat. The bullet had grazed his ribs, bad, but not fatal. She wrapped her scarf tight around the wound, her hands steady despite the cold. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered. "I owed you that much," she said quietly. He tried to smile, but his strength gave out. Elise glanced down at the ledger, lying half-buried beside Briggs' body. She picked it up, brushing snow from the cover. "Is this what's worth all this blood?" she asked softly. Daniel's breath came ragged. "Maybe not what's inside it, but what it means." Elise nodded, slipping the ledger into her satchel. "Then let's make sure it reaches the right hands." They dragged themselves away from the riverbank, each step heavier than the last. Behind them, the fog swallowed the bodies and the wreckage, leaving only the whisper of the river, cold, eternal, indifferent. For Daniel Harrow, it felt like the war was ending. But the truth, he knew, was only beginning. The road out of St. Vith was nothing but mud and broken glass. Daniel leaned heavily on Elise as they trudged along the empty stretch of highway, snow swirling around them in ghostly ribbons. The wound in his side burned with every step, but he kept moving. There was no stopping now. Behind them, smoke rose from the ruins. Somewhere beneath that gray haze, Briggs and Fox legacies were already turning to legend and ash. Elise guided him toward a small truck hidden beneath a sheet of canvas near the edge of the woods. "Found this last night," she said. "Fuel's low, but it should get us close to Bastogne." Daniel climbed into the passenger seat, gritting his teeth as the pain flared. The engine coughed, then roared to life. They drove in silence for miles, the snow growing thicker. Daniel watched the horizon blur, shattered trees, burned-out tanks, the bones of Europe scattered like forgotten relics. Finally, Elise spoke. "When we reach Bastogne, what then?" Daniel looked at the ledger in her satchel. "There's a contact there. Major Hensley, Monuments Division. He'll know how to get this to London." Elise nodded but didn't smile. "If he's still alive." They reached a crossroads where the signposts were riddled with bullet holes. A small chapel stood nearby, its steeple broken. Daniel motioned for her to stop. "We need to rest. And I need to think." Inside, the chapel smelled of candle wax and frost. A few pews remained, their wood splintered by shrapnel. Daniel sank onto one, breathing heavily. Elise lit a candle at the altar. The tiny flame flickered, soft and defiant against the cold. "You really believe this ledger will change anything?" she asked quietly. Daniel stared at the dancing light. "Maybe not, but truth has to start somewhere, even if it burns in the hands that hold it." A sound outside, engines. Several of them. Elise's face went pale. Daniel moved to the window and froze. Trucks, American marked, rolling through the snow. But the men who stepped out weren't regular troops. Clean uniforms. No insignia. OSS. Elise whispered, "How did they find us?" Daniel's eyes fell to the candlelight glinting off a piece of metal, a small transmitter clipped to the side of the ledger's binding. He stared at it, realization turning to dread. "They didn't find us," he said quietly. "We led them here." Daniel tore the transmitter from the ledger's binding and crushed it beneath his boot. The tiny spark that followed was enough to make Elise flinch. "They were tracking us the whole time," she whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "Briggs must have planted it before he was gone." He swallowed hard. "We've got minutes before they close in." Through the shattered window, he could see them, black coats, polished rifles, moving in quiet formation toward the chapel. The precision was unmistakable. These weren't soldiers chasing fugitives. They were cleaners sent to erase loose ends. Elise grabbed her rifle. "We fight." Daniel shook his head. "No, we make them think they already have us." He limped toward the altar, eyes scanning the room. A fallen beam, a stack of hymnals, an old oil lamp. A plan began to form. "Help me," he said. Together they dragged the pews into a rough barricade, then poured lamp oil across the floor. The smell filled the air, sharp, oily, desperate. Outside, a voice shouted, "Lieutenant Harrow, OSS command. Step out and surrender the ledger." Daniel looked at Elise. "Take the back door. The crypt tunnel should lead to the hill. I'll draw them in." She shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm not leaving you." He smiled faintly. "You're not. You're taking history with you." Before she could protest, he pressed the ledger into her hands. "If they get this, none of it matters." The door burst open. Bullets ripped through the air, splinters flying. Daniel struck a match and tossed it. Flame raced across the oil-soaked floor, swallowing the pews in seconds. The men outside hesitated, shouting orders as the fire roared higher. Elise crouched behind a stone pillar, watching in horror as Daniel staggered toward the door, gun in hand. He fired once, twice, just enough to keep their eyes on him. Then, in the chaos of the smoke, he turned and slipped through the side passage, vanishing into the narrow tunnel beneath the chapel. They crawled through the darkness, the rumble of collapsing wood echoing above. When they finally emerged into the freezing night, the chapel was an inferno, a beacon blazing against the snow. Elise glanced back. "Do you think they'll believe we died in there?" Daniel leaned against a tree, his breath ragged. "They'll believe what they want, and that's all we need." The fire burned behind them, a pyre for lies or for truth. Daniel wasn't sure anymore, but he knew one thing. As long as Elise carried that ledger, the fight wasn't over. By dawn, the fire behind them had faded to smoke. Daniel and Elise moved through the frozen forest in silence, following a narrow path toward Bastogne. The snow muffled their steps, the world around them eerily still. Daniel's wound throbbed with each breath. He could feel the fever creeping in, slow, determined. Elise noticed, but said nothing. She just pressed on, guiding him through the trees. By midday, they saw the town. Bastogne lay like a scar across the landscape. Burned-out vehicles, shattered homes, the faint hum of Allied trucks winding through the mist. A group of weary paratroopers manned a checkpoint on the outskirts. Daniel raised his hand weakly. "American, 101st," he managed. The soldiers lowered their rifles at once, rushing to help. "You're a sight for sore eyes, pal. We thought St. Vith was gone for good," one of them said, helping Daniel into a truck. Inside the medic tent, warmth and the smell of disinfectant hit him all at once. Elise stood nearby, silent, the ledger clutched close. When the medic stepped away, Daniel motioned her over. "We did it," he whispered. "Get Hensley, tell him everything." But Elise hesitated. "Before we give it to anyone, I need to see what's inside." Daniel's brow furrowed. "You don't." "I do," she said firmly. She opened the ledger. The pages crackled with dampness. Names, numbers, signatures, all in careful handwriting. But as she turned the pages, her face drained of color. These aren't just Nazi officers," she whispered. "There are Americans here. British, French." Daniel reached out, scanning the lines. The signatures were unmistakable, corporate seals, government ciphers, coded initials linking supply chains and acquisitions. Paintings, statues, gold, and names of those who had paid for them on both sides of the war. His stomach turned. "Dear God," he muttered. Elise closed the book slowly. "This ledger doesn't prove one man's guilt. It proves everyone's." Daniel leaned back, exhausted, his face pale. That's why they wanted it buried. Why they sent men like Briggs. Why Falk kept it hidden. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant artillery rolled across the hills, a grim reminder that the war still hadn't ended. Elise looked at him, her eyes steady. "What do we do with it?" Daniel exhaled shakily. "We decide who deserves to know. The world or no one." She nodded. "Then we'd better make that decision before someone makes it for us." Outside, a voice called, "Major Hensley, we've found them." Elise's fingers tightened on the ledger. Daniel's gaze met hers, the unspoken understanding clear. The truth could save nations or destroy them. Major Hensley entered the medic tent like a man carved from stone. His uniform was impeccable despite the mud of Bastogne, his silver insignia gleaming in the lantern light. He carried himself with quiet authority and the kind of calm that made Daniel's stomach twist. "Private Harrow," Hensley said, his voice low, deliberate. "We've been looking for you." Daniel forced himself to sit upright. "Sir, I've got something that belongs to the Monuments Division." Hensley's eyes flicked to Elise, then to the satchel in her lap. "So I've heard." He gestured. "May I?" Elise hesitated. Daniel gave a slow nod. She handed the ledger over. Hensley turned a few pages, his expression unreadable. "You know what this is, don't you?" Daniel nodded weakly. "A record of everything stolen, not just by the Nazis." Hensley closed the book with a quiet thud. "You're right. It's a record of the war itself, the part no one will ever put in the history books." Elise's voice trembled. "Then you'll use it. Expose them." He looked at her kindly, too kindly. "Miss Moreau, the world doesn't survive by digging up every corpse it's buried. It survives by forgetting just enough to move forward." Daniel's breath caught. "So you'll cover it up?" Hensley met his eyes. "I'll preserve it, in the only way it can be preserved. Locked away, protected, until the world is ready to face it." Elise shook her head. "That's what they all say." Hensley sighed. "Do you think the people rebuilding Paris or Antwerp want to know they were funded by the same corporations that armed both sides? Truth isn't always freedom. Sometimes it's just fire with no place to burn." Daniel's voice was hoarse. "And who decides that?" "You." "I decide nothing," Hensley said. "I follow orders. You should try it sometime." He handed the ledger to a nearby officer. "Secure this. It's classified under Operation Prometheus." Elise stepped forward, eyes blazing. "You can't." Daniel reached out, gripping her wrist. "Let him take it." She froze, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Daniel looked up at Hensley. "Just promise me it won't disappear completely." Hensley studied him for a long, heavy moment, then gave a single nod. "I can promise that much." When he left, the tent felt colder. The wind outside howled, carrying with it the sound of distant gunfire and crumbling walls. Elise turned to Daniel, her voice breaking. "You let them bury the truth." He looked down at his hands. "Maybe, but at least now it has a grave, not a bonfire." She stared at him for a long time, her eyes full of sorrow and something deeper, understanding, perhaps, or pity. Then she whispered, "History doesn't forgive men like you, Daniel." He managed a faint, bitter smile. "Neither does it remember them." The war ended not with thunder, but with exhaustion. Weeks later, Daniel sat in a hospital outside Liège, the spring air cold but sweet. The bandages had come off, though the ache beneath them never quite did. From his window, he could see soldiers returning home, some laughing, some silent, all changed. Elise hadn't visited in days. The last time she'd come, she'd said very little, just that she was heading back to France to help rebuild what was left of her town. She'd left him a single letter on the nightstand. "You did what you thought was right. I can't forgive it, but I can understand it. Maybe one day, when the world's ready, the truth will find its way back to light." Daniel kept it folded in the pocket of his uniform, worn soft from rereading. Every now and then, a courier arrived with papers for him to sign, demobilization forms, medals, commendations. None of them mentioned the ledger or Falk or Briggs. Those names had already been scrubbed clean from the record. One morning, as he shaved in the cracked mirror above his cot, a nurse brought him a parcel with no return address. Inside was a small, soot-stained package wrapped in brown paper. He opened it carefully. A photograph. The same Caravaggio painting that Falk had hidden in his cellar, The Taking of Christ. But on the back, scrawled in Elise's hand, were 3 words. Still worth saving. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without thinking, he smiled. Not out of joy, but out of something deeper. Recognition. Later that day, he walked through the streets of Liège. Children played among the ruins, their laughter echoing where sirens once wailed. Church bells rang for the first time in months. He passed a burned-out museum. Its doors hung open, and inside, sunlight fell on broken marble and dust. Daniel stepped through the threshold, running a hand over a cracked statue's face. Still worth saving, he murmured. He realized then that maybe that was all any of them had ever been doing. Not fighting for glory, or vengeance, or truth. Just trying to save the pieces of a world too fragile to hold together. When he stepped back outside, the wind carried a single page of newsprint down the street. He caught it before it hit the ground. The headline read, "Europe rebuilds. Hope returns to the ruins." Daniel folded the page carefully and slipped it into his coat beside Elise's letter. For the first time in years, he let himself believe it might be true. 10 years later, the world had learned to smile again, or at least to pretend it could. In the summer of 1955, Daniel Harrow stood in the Grand Hall of the National Gallery in London, surrounded by paintings he'd once only seen in textbooks. The air smelled of polish and linen. The war, of course, was long over. But the ghost still whispered between the frames. He was no longer Private Harrow, just Professor, once again. His students knew him as a quiet man who walked with a limp and spoke softly about art, but fiercely about memory. Few knew the rest of the story. At the far end of the gallery hung a familiar painting, The Taking of Christ. It had been returned anonymously 5 years earlier, with no note, no explanation. Daniel had smiled the day it arrived, though he told no one why. He stood before it now, hands folded behind his back. The Christ's eyes, sorrowful, serene, seemed to meet his own. In them, Daniel saw every face he'd tried to save, every compromise he'd made, every truth buried so that beauty might endure a little longer. A voice behind him broke the silence. "You still come here every week?" He turned. Elise Moreau stood a few steps away, older, her hair touched with silver, but her presence undiminished. Daniel's breath caught. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." She smiled faintly. "Neither was I. France needed rebuilding. I stayed busy." She paused, her gaze shifting to the painting. "I heard they found the ledger, buried in a military archive near Washington." Daniel nodded slowly. "And they sealed it again," she said. "But copies exist. Quietly made, quietly passed on. The world is starting to ask questions." He exhaled, half relief, half dread. "So it begins." Elise smiled a little sadly. "Truth always finds its time, Daniel, even if it takes a generation." They stood together in silence, watching the light drift across the canvas. Visitors passed by, unaware of the weight that painting carried, or the 2 people who had risked everything for it. Finally, Elise turned to go. "You did save something, you know," she said softly. He frowned. "What's that?" She looked at him with that same quiet fire he remembered from the tunnels. Dignity, the kind that doesn't fit in museums. And with that, she was gone, leaving him with the echo of her words and the faint scent of lavender in the air. Daniel looked once more at the painting. For the first time in years, he didn't see loss. He saw endurance. He whispered, almost to himself, "Still worth saving." Outside, the bells of Westminster began to ring, clear, hopeful, unbroken. And for Daniel Harrow, the monument's man of the 101st, that sound was enough.